Alright, so you are on video, so if you ask a question, I may repeat it just so you're in the class, and you might go, why is he just repeating me? I'm not doing active listening. I'm trying to make sure that everybody can hopefully hear that. Alright, so a couple of pieces we need to make sure you get done this week. So the discussion board, if you did not get week 1 done, please make sure you get it done. Most of you have. Week 2, there is a second discussion board. Please make sure you do that one. I see only, looks like 3 or 4 people have completed that so far. Under the assignment tab, so you will need to make sure you've done the reading. There is, and I know this is not the most exciting reading material, but there is some history and some interesting pieces too. How did we arrive at this particular place we're at now? And then these programming assignments. Several of them are ungraded, but I encourage you to do all of them. So this is the PowerPoint that accompanies it, so you can use that for some exercise. These are kind of an interesting way to learn terminology. These are not graded. Come on, Cengage. But it's a great way to kind of look through some of the terminology that we might pop up on a quiz that you might need to know at some point. So for some of you, this is going to be your review. Others of you, this is new material. So I encourage you to use all these resources that we put available to you. There's also the crossword puzzle. I will say some people have had some interesting luck trying to use Safari on a Mac. The crossword puzzle is one that will not work on Safari. So again, I'll throw out, if you're using a Mac, try to use Firefox or Chrome. That will be your best bet. And then lastly, there's a quiz in here. And so that quiz launches inside of Cengage again. And it's just a real quick review and overview of what you've learned. So in this particular case, I think there are, yes, take one. There's 10 questions. So these are things you should know before we get out of here. All right. So we looked at exercise 1-4, and I'm going to go back into it really quickly. As quickly as Cengage will let me in. So just kind of wrap back up where we were at. I am trying to post as many of these class videos as possible, so come on, Sandbox. So this is that case of we want to enter a couple of different dimensions, and we want to create a program that will output this code. So it actually gives us a really good example of what we're going to do in here, but I want to make a couple of twists to it. And so this is why one of the things that's really nice about this sandbox, I know that I can't hurt anything. So I'm going to start out with, this idea that I'm always going to put my name and any other information up here, and I can put these comment tags anywhere that I want to do that. So I'm going to put in maybe scramble or something, because I want to try something a little different. And I can put in all the white lines I want to up and down. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to say width equals input, enter a width. Okay. Well, I'm going to put in a height. All right, so I have two variables now, length or height and width. Typically, I also went over the part where I tend to like to go in and put in width equals 0 at the beginning. What I'm doing is using that variable the first time. I'm setting it to 0. But we don't necessarily need to do that in this case. We're fairly confident we're not going to have any overrun. And then I'm going to have one here called area equals width times height. So if I run this as it is here, so we put in a print statement that says print the area is area essentially what's up there. When I do this, just to prove to myself that what it's really doing is getting that input as a text string and not as a mathematical number, I'm going to run it. And hopefully I've typed everything right. Enter a width, and I'm going to type ABC. It's going to say, all right, can't multiply by a non-integer of type what in the world? So it's giving me an error. So I went in and looked and I go, oh, so I got a height and I got a width, but I can't do anything with them. Now, interestingly, if I do this, I just want to see what happens. So I'm going to experiment a little bit. So in this case, it actually does. If I use a plus, it just puts them together. So that leads me to kind of think, well, what other kinds of strange things can I do? In this case, I really need to use some kind of a conversion. So I'm also going to say width equals, now, the book is showing us the integer, but what if I did a float? And notice it turns orange, says, oh, there's something in there, and I'm going to put width in there. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I've changed them to a float and shoved them over. Now let's see if there's something I can do here. So now we're going to multiply them. Alright, so now we're going to run this. Enter a width. So now I can put in fractional pieces because I made them a float. Now, there's some downsides to this because we don't yet know how to control how many pieces are in there. And I'm going to change this height times width to make it a division, just to kind of show you what can happen. So we haven't error checked or done anything on our input. We haven't cleaned it up. So if I run this now, and I know it's going to be a little weird. So 10, a height of 3. So in this case, 3.333333335. Wait a minute. So it even rounds weirdly, and we'll eventually get to looking at that. Why would it round to a 5 and not a, oh, weird, okay. So we have to deal with a few things when we use a float. This is the maximum size of that float. So we have limits on how big it can be. We have limits on how big an integer can be. But that gives us that ability to deal with that a little bit better if we need something that's floating. So, and the reason we're going to do that the next exercise, we'll do something very similar. So this is your time to play around. Now, this one, of course, you can grade it. If I graded this right now, it'd be really horrible. Let's see what happens when I say to grade it right now. It ought to probably give me a 0% actually. Yeah, and it's going to test for all those things. If I change it just like this, but I leave them as floats, I'm not sure if it will catch it or not. Let's find out. Because it's putting in, yeah, So it's putting in these values, 2 and 5 and 5 and 3. So in this case, it's going to not pass this test. So nothing we did wrong, we just converted one to a float and the other to a float. And now we can do that. Actually, if I type the right thing. So now we have that conversion. Now if I run checks, it'll say, oh great, we passed. We got 100%, so I could submit that. So, yes, we can just solve the problem, but we can also use this to do some experiments. You might find out all kinds of interesting features and things you can do. The book has a couple of charts about different math functions that you can use, so some of them are different than what you anticipate. So please, 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 please experiment a little bit. Do some print statements, see what kind of weirdness you can come up with. So that is exercise 1-4 kind of in a relative short piece. So let's go to our next to the last one, and I'm going to launch 1.6. Started, and it'll take a while to load up a sandbox. Bless you. Alright. So this one is asking us, now we have a little less detail, and you'll see as we go on, you'll get a little less handholding. So I'm trying to walk my way through on some of these with you, but you'll start to see a little less pieces here. So request a number representing a radius as input from the user. Use the formula pi r squared to compute the area, output the result with a suitable label. Okay. Perfect. So typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan out what I'm going to do. So I might just do it here in comments. So I'm going to do an input. I'm going to do a calculation. I'm going to do an output. So we take in data, we manipulate it, and we output something. Perfect. So I need one called radius, I think. And I'm going to set it up to equal to 0. And I'm going to have one called area, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. So now I've got my variables, or at least I think I know what all my variables are. So I might even, and this is overkill, but just to prove the point. So now all my variables are stored here. I know what they are. I can look at them quickly. That's another advantage to this. So, bless you. All right. So we need to get input from a user. So we're going to say something like radius is equal to, and remember that's that assignment operator, it's shoving everything off to the left. Please enter the radius of the circle. Alright. So we get an input of that radius, and now we can do some calculations. So in this case, we're going to use a formula. Area equals 3.14 times our radius. Alright, great. And output the result with a suitable label. Alright, so that says we're creating a print statement. The area of your circle is area something about my unit squared. Alright. So, and you can always move these around a little bit. In fact, you can close these instructions if you need additional room. So I can make those smaller. So, that looks like what we have. We have everything. Does anybody see any problems with it right offhand? Shall we run it and see what happens? Sure. That is always the best way to look at it. We're going to, oh, what is that? Can't multiply sequence by the non-integer type what? Alright, so we didn't even get to the point where it said we need to multiply this. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to identify what actually happened. So it says line 11 caused us an issue. So I'm going to use a comment line, and I'm going to block out that entire line. And I'm going to run this just to see now what happens. The area of your circle is 0 units squared. So it's supposed to ask me, did I forget something in here? Take a look right here. Did I put in an input? Alright, so now I'm going to run it again. And now it says, oh, please enter the radius of your square, or your circle. 50. Oh, it's 0 units square. Okay, so now, alright, we're getting a little closer. Now I've got to go take my troubleshooting piece out here. So notice, it actually said, hey, there's an error on line 11, but it really might have been because of something ahead of that. And so when you're troubleshooting, a lot of times it's not the line that is referenced. That error is caused by something ahead of that. And so sometimes we need to check that out a little bit. So now I'm going to run it again. I'm going to say 50 again. Oh, can't multiply sequence by non-integer of type float. Well, what does that mean? Did I do something else I missed? So, what I didn't do is I didn't convert this input into a numeric value, either a float or an integer. So, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to add that there. You could also do it right in here. So, you can do it at the same line. I prefer to set it down here just for now, because that way it explicitly tells me that, alright, I got an input, and here I'm shoving it into a value. So now let me try this one more time. 50. Is 157.0 units squared. Oh, well that makes more sense. That seems like it works. Let's see what happens though. Because all I thought I could do was convert them to integers. Let's see what happens if I convert this to an integer. So, I'm going to have an integer multiplied by a float. It's got a decimal. Let's see what Python does. This might be interesting. So I'm going to put in the same value, 50. Oh. Python didn't break. Almost every other language would break. But what it did, because it said you're multiplying a float times an integer, it automatically cast that in as a float. So, is it good practice to do? No. But Python will save your butt if you do something like that. Alright. But I look at this, and so we have our program, and I can shorten it up because I can put that float right up here. So I could actually say float of the input. So I could get rid of this, make it a little shorter, and sometimes that's my goal. Let me run it again, make sure I got all my parentheses in there. Okay. Are there other ways we could shorten this up? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things we can do to make it shorter. I don't need these, but I like them there just as that garbage collection. And these programs are fairly small. They're not going to cause a lot of headache and overhead. But maybe there's a better way. So can I return? So here we said pi is 3.14. Is that really the right value for pi? It's kind of a handy shortcut. And we know that it's really like 3.14. Does anybody have memorized pi to like 1,000 digits? No? None of you have ever done it? Okay, good, because we'd have to talk about that. So I'm going to guess. So if I said, well, I know that it's really 141592653589793. Let's see what happens when I multiply by a little bigger number. Is it still going to work? And we get a little more exact answer, but we get all this other stuff, right? So whatever values we use in a float. So if we go out to 2 decimals, that's typically where we end up unless we divide. So division will end up with some odd values. But you'd think, it's a programming language. Is there a way that pi is maybe stored inside of this? So I'm going to open up a window here. And first place I'm going to go is python.org. And I want to search for pi. Alright, well, that's not very helpful. So I might just do a generic search, and I might search pi in Python, and see if somebody else comes up with a difference. Oh, hang on. If I can spell pi right, it would look better. So sometimes that python.org is a great place, but the other one that I really like is I like one called W3 Schools. And if you've taken our web design class, this is kind of one of the W3 Schools, has a lot of content there. Also, W3 Schools also has some really neat ways to look at Python. Alright, so when I look over here, I got a couple of things that I'm going to see. And we're going to look at a new command that you haven't seen yet. So there is a concept called libraries, and they're already pre-configured for our use. So people have went out and built entire repertoires of all different kinds of commands and useful features. Those don't automatically all load. Some of them do, like the print library and some of the basic ones. But here, it says we can use something called import math library, and then we can, in this case, print it. So I'm going to go back. That sounds kind of intriguing. So I'm going to come up here at the top of my program, and I'm going to type import math. So, and there's a lot of them. If I want to do random numbers and things, I have to import a random function. But it's pretty easy. We just say import math. Okay. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to do a couple of things really quickly. I'm just going to take these out so I can play with this again. Alright, so we've imported math. So now I want to print what it says pi is equal to. So I got to go back to my, so it says, it says print math.pi. Okay, hang on. So there is something kind of weird here. So math.pi. So we call it dotted notation. So we're referencing that library, so math.pi, and we're searching for that function inside of it. And there's a whole ton of other functions. But what we're looking for, and we use this dotted notation to reference something inside of that library, inside of that group. So if I run this now, it says, all right, pi is equal to 3.1415973, blah, 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 blah. We could use that instead then. So now I'm going to take this back out. I don't need to print pi. And instead of saying area equals, when we write a number, I could say math.pi. Not a lot of difference in our coding, but what it should do then is reference that math.pi number, the value that's stored in that math library, take it times the radius, and should run. Hello, wake up. Wake up, let me break. Well, yeah, that may, okay. I may have broken the, so, hang on. And it's probably a limitation of their sandbox environment. So I'll just assign it a variable. And it doesn't like apparently opening the math library inside of it. That's interesting, because it'll let me use it other places. But we'll look at a lot of these when we start getting out there. So there are some limitations inside the sandbox, and it looks like I found kind of an interesting one there. So I didn't break anything. It just doesn't want to work. I can break the command. Well, I can't even get it to break the command line. Interesting. All right, I'll have to play around with that a little more in the sandbox and see. But I know there's some weird things that'll happen in there, but there's a lot of different functions and things that we can use. And I really like the, I like when you get stuck. This W3 Schools has a really good reference. So when we say casting, so when I say casting, that's what I'm really doing, is I'm taking an integer or a float or a string. So I can also take numbers and convert them back to a string if I need to manipulate them that way. So they call it casting. So this has got an examples of those. All kinds of things are in here. So when we start getting into Boolean logic, so things like greater than, less than, and in this case equals, I notice that the equals has two equal signs in it. You'll see that that's a really great spot to go to. So if you're going to plug in a spot, this is a great reference site also that I like to use. So, alright, so we should be able to solve this one. Apparently we don't need to input that yet. Alright. Alright. So that would actually solve the problem. It'll run. I think something very mad now. What have I gotten mad? I bet I have. Hang on. Maybe it's not a... Reduce equals float. Somewhere I've made it mad. I'm not really sure where. But somewhere I have done something to make it stop at, essentially at the end of this. Probably have. Do I have one too many? Maybe. No. I have been known when it automatically generates those to add my own content there. So. Thanks. Oh, I had left the comment tag on. Great. That's what happens when you can't see colors very well. That's actually going to print it twice in there. So actually it probably would work with the math function. That was my silliness there. So it's easy to do. If something doesn't work, we have to investigate why it doesn't work. So now if I go put that back in, it probably would actually work. So close that. And I'm going to look at our last exercise for the day. Launch, Cengage. Alright. So this one sounds very simple to start with. So we read our instructions. Write and test a program that accepts the user's name as text and age as a number as input. Program should output a sentence containing the user's name and age. Example of the program input. Okay. So that doesn't sound too horrible. So once again, I'm going to just make sure I always put that in there. I'm creating this file called myinfo.py. So enter your name, enter your age, and output Alex is 23 years old. Alright. Well, I just want to spice it up a little bit. Alright, so I just put in a couple of things in there. Alright. So I did something a little different there. And I'm really guilty of always grabbing the forward slash instead of the backslash just out of habit. So I put in /n/n, or /n/n. And if you notice what it did, it actually gave me an empty return so we can space our output out vertically. So it's one of the first one of these embedded things we'll show you. You don't have to use it yet, but it's a handy thing to know. So /n/n gives me 2 lines of space in there. So maybe I said I don't want 2 of them. The weird part is it's inside of our text block, or it looks like it is. They're called escape characters. So here we can put in a new line. There's a couple of other ones. So a tab is a /t, and notice how it spaces it over for me nicely. So there's several of those, and we'll get to those as we work through here. But I just wanted to make the top of this a little more exciting. So I'm going to create a couple of variables, and I'm going to do them up here at the top again, just so I can keep track of them. So I'm going to have name equals 0, and I'm going to have age equals 0. So right now I've got 2 variables, and I put in zeros in them. So there's 0 content in there right now, and I know that. So now I'm going to say I need to input something, but oh wait, hang on, I got to go name equals input. Please enter your first name. Alright. Harmless as it goes. And I also need an age. Right, now I'm going to pretty it up a little bit. I'm going to put the colons in there and a space so it'll look a little better on the screen. So right now if I run it, it's going to ask, welcome to the Age-O-Matic. We know all. Please enter your first name. Enter your age. Alright, so now it's got 2 variables in there. So it's got both my age and my name. Now, my name is perfect because it's a string variable as we input it. The age, though, we might want to convert it to a number format. Well, we almost always tell numbers of ages as, do we do it as a float or do we do it as a string? Or do we do it as an integer? How many people say I'm 52.4 years old? Do you know anybody that does that? No. The only exception is typically like kids. How old's your child? He's 47 months. Wait, what? Why isn't he just 4 years? So, I'm going to convert this age to an integer. So I have that as an integer. Shouldn't change when I run it. Oh. Except it did. Why is it giving me an error here? Why would this give me an error? Anybody see anything wrong with it? So we're going to look at line 11. Input. Please enter your first name. I'm going to shove that into name. So it says line 11 is the error. Let's remote out this line and see if it makes any difference. So again, it tells me that it's line 11, but it could be above or below or somewhere else in there. So let's run it again and say, what's your name? Huh. Well, that worked. Well, that's really weird. So let's take out my comment tag, and let's see what happens. Let's run it again. Alright. So, if you didn't notice what happened, it had actually caught this and dragged it to the next line when I put in an extra ending parenthesis. So it didn't realize that those were two separate lines. So, end of lines, spacing can be important. So, now we have a name, we have an age. So we can manipulate this around now a little bit. So, I want a print statement. So it says, I want to print Alex is 23 years old. Well, I can't deal with that, but what I can do is print name, comma, is, and then I can pop out age, years old. So, see how I separated those? So name is, and then age, so I probably need a space there. So let's see what happens now. There. 41. I got younger. Brad is 41 years old. Alright. So I could even check it at this point and see if that works. So I go down to my tasks. I could run checks. Is this going to give me 100? Yay, look, we won. But because we made this an age, we can do something to that. It would have not changed anything of the output if I took this out. So if I run this again, the output's going to look exactly the same. I got even younger, and that output's the same. Let's see if it's even smart enough to check that. And I think it is on this one. Oh, it's not. Ooh, we could get away with something. But I know that I want to use it for something else. I want to then say, and, get my fingers on the right keys, you are age times 365 days old. Yeah. It's not exact because I don't know exactly, we didn't put in your birth dates and calculate it, but let's see if that runs. 18,980 days old. Well, that makes me feel very old and sad. But the reason we can manipulate that, we know that you are, in this case, whatever that age is, it's an integer, and we can multiply it times 365 days in a year and get kind of an approximation. So one way we can look at that and kind of control our content. So that one's actually weirdly easier than the problem before it. But what I want you to do is try these kinds of things. Experiment with them. So when I go in, and you all have 100%, that's great. But what you really need to do is also do some experimentation. Try things. See if you can make things work. So what else could we do with an age? Well, we could say, we could put in some calculations. We could say, are you old enough to purchase liquor? So you could do a conversion to that. So you can multiply it. You can do all different kinds of things. So this is our basic program. We can just add and manipulate it and make it look a little better. So here we showed you a couple of things. We showed you how to do the new lines. So \n, \t, and you say, oh, I wonder if there's other ones that I can use. So I look for escape characters in Python, and oh, look. So we do get some escape characters. And so if we need to do some weird quote marks, we can do new lines, we can do a carriage return, tabs, backspace, form feed, and some of those you may not see or need yet. Octal values, that's kind of a little weird, so this is going to show you an octal value. You don't need to know that. Base 8, not yet, but there's a lot of different ones you can do. The most common one we do is that new line, just to force things down and out. So one of the tools that I use, back to Python, close, there we go. So at the end of a program, and you're going to see, we don't need to do it inside of this sandbox environment because it stays up and you can see it. But when our program runs and we're using idle, and we're actually doing it on our computer, which we're going to get to here in a little bit, when we do that, that program closes very, very quickly. And so what we do is we put an input in at the end, something like this. Now, I'm not even assigning it a variable, and that may screw up our sandbox, but and notice it sits there and it's blinking. That means it's still active. And so that program doesn't exit until we press that key. So it holds up this screen. And you'll see where that's going to come in handy. So I'm going to go ahead and just start putting it in the bottom of these, just so you see what it is. And we'll show you what that's going to look like here. All right. So we went through all the assignments. Now, in the future, are we going to give you every answer like this? No. But I want you guys to all get out on that first street, try things, experiment, test things, try it. So what you will need to do, there is a 10-question quiz here. You need to make sure that that's done along with all the assignments and that discussion board by Sunday night. So if you're curious, the next couple of weeks are already popped up here, and so we have some other pieces in here that you can see. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to email or contact me in any way to ask those questions. I may send out announcements and if it's relevant to the entire class. All right, everybody stay warm, and we will see you next week.